What do you do when you're ready to quilt? Ready to finish your quilt. The quilt top is done, the backing is finished, you're ready to put your quilt sandwich together, baste it all and get started. But the batting's the wrong size, or you don't have enough, or it needs to be pieced. How do you do that? What's the best way to piece batting? Can you piece it? Will it get lumpy? What's going to happen? What will it look like? Well, I'm going to answer those questions for you today. I'm Leah Louise from Inspired Quilting by Leah Louise, and you can see behind me I have a bunch of quilts in progress, and I'm working on getting some quilting finished. The final quilting is what I'm working on right now. The backing's made and I'm cutting the batting to size, and every once in a while I find a spot where I don't quite have the complete size that I need. I'm missing maybe a strip on the edge across the top. And what I want to show you is how I fix that. There is a way to piece your batting together that's very effective. It doesn't create any lumps or bumps on your quilt, and it works beautifully, and it's very easy to do. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to get the quilting finished, but we are going to get the batting prepared, and everything is going to be basted together, and we'll work on the quilting in the next video because I want to do some free motion quilting with you. But first, let's take a look at this batting and see what we need to do. And I'm going to take you step by step through that. But first, please, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you join me in the future. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm anxious to show this to you. Before I attach my two pieces of batting together, I need to add my walking foot. I need to put this onto my sewing machine. So I've taken off my regular presser foot, which is nice and smooth on the bottom, and that's what we use when we generally quilt, because this will just draw the fabric through as these feed dogs underneath pull the bottom fabric. So I'm just going to set that aside, but instead what I'm going to use is my walking foot. And this is a really handy gizmo, and what it does is, you see, as I lift this arm, see those feed dogs here? They work in conjunction with those feed dogs. So as the bottom is pulling the backing or the batting of the quilt, this is pulling the top at the same rate. So if you've ever gotten to the end of a quilt that you're quilting and you have more fabric than you do batting or backing, this is what's going to solve that problem. This also eliminates the issue of having pleats and tucks on the back. Now, obviously, it's important that when you baste it, however you do that, which my way to do that nowadays is with the spray adhesive because it's so darn easy. But you need to have your quilt sandwich basted well together in order to keep your entire quilt sandwich moving along at the same rate. So now that I have this on, let me get my batting and we will get started. So I have two pieces, and I'm doing the two smaller pieces, so I only have about a 15-inch seam here, because otherwise it's a lot to manage in order putting these pieces together and get it on the camera. So what I'm going to do is use like a darning stitch, and I'm going to set it on a wide. Let me just get these settings here and see what my options are. Okay, so I have it as wide as it'll go. And what it's going to do is a long zigzag, but it's going to take stitches as it makes the zigzag. And I'm going to crunch these two up. Let me get my gloves. The gloves will help my fingers hold the batting. So let me get my nifty little gloves on, because these little fingertips that are put on here grab the batting really well. Okay, there we go. So I now have my gloves on. I can hold the batting, and I'm just going to put these guys together. So I'm going to put my pieces of batting right up close to each other. Don't leave a space. Bunch it. Don't overlap it. And when I say bunch it, just tuck it close together. And you want to aim it down the center of the presser foot. So I'm just going to line these up and let the walking foot do the work. If I find myself getting a bit off center, I can just raise my presser foot and adjust it. And I may come in back here and just pull that along a little bit. If I notice that it gets a little bunchy, and sometimes that can happen just if a bit of the batting gets caught underneath in the back as it's being fed along. And here we go. Now, sometimes your batting has low points, and that's, you can see throughout the, the pieces. It's not always 100% consistent because of the way this is made. It's just the nature of the beast. And so you just work with it. And if you have a spot that's a little on the low end, I'm noticing I do have to pull this one along. For whatever reason, this batting, maybe because it's thinner, doesn't want to pull evenly, and then it bunches a little here. But I'd rather have it close together than spread apart. And then once I'm done, I'll show you. And because I'm using my hand behind the pressure foot to give it just a little tug, and I'm not really pulling it, I'm just keeping it taut so it doesn't have a chance to get bundled up back there and hold the process down. Okay, so we want to keep these. Now, I did have these cut uneven. I cut it off the ends of the batting, but I had to trim my primary piece off, and the ends weren't quite the same size, but that's okay. I can work around that. So I'm getting these a little close together. All right, so we're just about down to the end. And you want to make sure that your thread matches your batting, because if there's any place where you're going to see through the fabric, if you have light fabric, then the stitching can become very visible, and we don't want that to happen. So I think I can get some light on this. It is hard to see. Does that work for you? And you can see the zigzag. I'm going to come in. There's the camera. It gets a little shadowy up there. There's not quite enough light. But you can see how this zigzags. So on the front, I don't have a lump. It just joins it together nicely. And if we look on the back, it's the same. Oh, you can actually see the stitching better on the back, which makes sense because the front it tends to have more on the top where the bottom is being pushed through. It flattens it out. So you can see those stitches there. It works really, really well. So now I'm going to take this piece and add it to my larger piece, and then my batting will be at the right size that I need. Now, the other thing that I do is I will attempt to line this seam up with a seam in the quilt. And it's not as hard as you'd think. If you have your batting cut a good 5 or 6 inches larger than your quilt, that gives you plenty of room to play with it. This one I have probably 10 inches. So that gives me some flexible room. And what I'll do is I'll line these up with my 9-patch blocks. And the 9 patches are all going to have a quilt line through them. So I know that will adhere and keep this seam well together. I'm always concerned if this is in the middle of a block versus along a seam, that during wash or heavy use, this can get pulled apart. Now, I can pull this and it's not going anywhere, and that's great. But, excuse me, I bumped the camera. Over time, things wear down and this can become a problem. So I always try to, look at the most practical way that's also efficient, that's going to, keep this intact for a long period. With my batting piece together, I've gone ahead and spray basted my quilt, so I have my backing fabric, my batting, and my quilt. And again, just spray based and it holds it right in place. But what I want to show you is, you can see right here, this is the seam in my batting, and you want to try and keep it as clean as possible. Only because the thread, especially with low volume, may show through. So keep that in mind. If you had a dark thread like this, that's sort of a turquoise, that's more apt to show through. So just keep that in mind as you're putting this together, to try not to get too much inside your your layers. But this is where the seam is joined. You can see the zigzag right there. And what I do is I set this seam right on top of it. And that way I'm not going to see or feel that seam in the middle of the block. And it's also a bit of a reinforcement. I just like the idea of having that seam here so it's not disturbing or creating something going on elsewhere. Because if it were here, we'd feel it, and if we would hold it up to the light, we'd be able to see it. But this way, it's essentially invisible. We don't even know that it's there. And I'll follow this seam all the way down, and I'll line up my batting that way. And so now I'm ready to get this quilted, but I just wanted to show you that quick little technique first. And I want to do some free motion quilting here. So the next video we'll get finished on this and work on some different quilting techniques. We'll do some straight line here on the 9 patches, but like I said, I want to do some free motion inside these blocks, so I'm getting some ideas together. So there you have it. If you need to piece your batting, you just use the zigzag, you find a darning stitch, whatever works for you, and you don't want to put a seam. I don't overlap them, I butt them up together. I don't like overlapping because it gets thick and it becomes very tactile. You know it's there and you can feel it, and sometimes you can see it. So that's what we do, and it's easy enough, and it's a good way to use your batting and not have as much waste if you get some small pieces. Now, I'm not going to use anything this small, but this was 15 inches wide by 60, and it was just the size that I needed, and it worked perfectly. So there you have it. And I hope you get an opportunity to try this out. I appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much for watching. And make sure you comment if you have any questions about this, and I can follow up in that with the next video. So have a great day. It was wonderful having you here. Please subscribe, and don't forget a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Have a great, great day.